This is the Amp Hour Podcast, released September 30th, 2018. Episode 409. Electronics Consultant Impedance Matching. Welcome to the Amp Hour. I'm Chris Gamble of Contextual Electronics.
Hi, I'm Peter from 1-Bit Squared.
Hello, I'm Eric Thompson from Low Voltage Labs.
And I'm Dave Young from Young Circuit Designs.
Welcome, guys. Thanks for showing up today. This is all a last-minute put-together a panel of sorts. Thanks to my travel this week, I was like, oh, man, what am I going to do for the Amp Hour? And then I was also like stressed about consulting stuff, and I was thinking, what if I just asked some people I know about consulting stuff? And so, that's what we're doing here today. So we're going to talk about basically being an electronics consultant, something I'm very new to, and I already have a bunch of questions about. But so all of you have either done or are doing electronics consulting. And I should mention as well, there are many other past guests of the Amp Hours I couldn't get a hold of. And so if I didn't talk to you, I'd love to do this kind of thing again in the future, from a very selfish standpoint as well. And so why don't we give a little background and go in that same order of, what you're doing now, but also like what your consulting background is.
So I own 1-Bit Squared, and it is mostly my main business is actually developing stuff for my own company, but I do provide consulting services through that same company too. And we provide either complete packages for developing certain devices, tools, and we also do project-related stuff.
Great. Eric, what about you?
So I own Low Voltage Labs. I've been doing consulting for, I think, about 10 years. And then I have some products too. In my case, the products and the consulting have been almost completely separate. There's been very little crossover.
Oh, yeah. So to that point, it's like part of the consulting is actually developing products that then later become also 1-Bit Squared products, which dials in the pricing and everything, which is very complicated.
Dave, how about you?
Yeah, so I run Young Circuit Designs. I do a bunch of early stage, usually for small companies and startups, just trying to get people from this, like, I have an idea or we have an Arduino platform or something like that, all the way through to like manufacturing 1,000, 10,000 units or whatever they need to really be to the next stage. And then I also run Blue Stamp Engineering. Chris, you and I have talked about that before. It's a summer program for high school students. So between those two things, I keep pretty busy.
Well, another piece of historical note, which I may have mentioned when Dave was on the show the first time, is that Dave left Keithley when I was there. Dave and I worked together at Keithley, and then he left to actually go do consulting. That was 9 years ago.
I know, it's been a while.
It has been a while, and I found a journal actually where I was writing to myself about this, and like, oh man, I saw that Dave's leaving for consulting, and I wonder how that's going to go for him, and so it's been interesting now that I've gone into it, and it's been these 9 years later. So how was that as a relatively younger person as well? I suppose you were pretty young for going to consulting.
Yeah, well, it was nice because, when you're in your 20s, you don't need a lot. So,
right,
it took me, between Blue Stamp and Young Circuit Designs, it took a few years before I was making reasonable money. And being able to run lean for a few years was certainly helpful.
Definitely.
But then even more shocking than like, hey, I'm not getting a paycheck anymore was... there's no more Friday happy hours with the coworkers. There's no more like, I've got this problem, so I'm going to go hang out at lunch and talk to these guys about it while we're hanging out or eating or whatever. The biggest shock I think for me was the loss of that camaraderie with the coworkers. That was a big deal.
Yeah, no, that is a huge deal. How did you other guys deal with that, like Peter and Eric? How did you? I mean, do you do meetups? Do you do social stuff? I mean, Peter, you're kind of out in the woods, huh?
Yeah. So, well, ha ha ha.
I mean, I always see you at Portland stuff, but you're actually in some other part of Oregon, right?
Yeah, I'm in Eugene, Oregon, which is 2 hours south from Portland. So it is not. It's still a city, I would say, even though some Portlanders wouldn't agree with that. But anyways,
Well, don't listen to hipsters too much, man.
yeah, and
Eric, we'll let you weigh in later. Don't worry.
But yeah, I actually had when I moved to Eugene. I was in California before that, and I worked there for a company, and then I started One Bit Squared here, and it took basically the first year and a half. I was pretty much only in the office at home, and then you start really developing a cabin fever symptoms.
Oh, yeah. Yep.
And so
yes.
my and I would call myself quite a social person, so I need the social component. So I actually realized that something is off and wrong. So I looked up a local hackerspace and started going there. And like basically, I started forcing myself to go there because you always have something to do. It's your company, your startup. So basically, it's some people say you just work all the time, and yeah, it's true. And you have to force yourself to take time off. And I had to do that. I started going to the hackerspace, and then these days I'm trying to drive up to Portland for the Dorkbot PDX once a month. And then also the conferences are very useful too, where you can combine the pleasant with business is basically mingling with people, connecting with people, talking about new projects, collaborations, and stuff like that. So that's how I deal with the fact that I'm working from home, and you don't have, as Dave said, it's like you don't have people around you.
Yeah. So Eric, you're up in Portland, right?
I'm in the Portland area, yes. And I found actually that I end up with a lot of clients who want me to come in for meetings or to work on projects with them together. So I haven't had as much of that, feeling left out of that group. In fact, sometimes I want more time on my own because I seem to end up in too many like meetings and too much time wanting clients wanting me there. So when I have a day where I can have a whole day to myself in my own office, I feel relieved a little bit. But
you can move to you can move to Eugene. You're welcome here.
That's right. But I also found early on when you guys started the AMP Hour, I didn't have as much of that. And listening to you and Dave talk about projects and things going on was kind of part of my connection, to tell you the truth. So.
Oh, okay. Yeah, like the water cooler effect of the AMP Hour.
Exactly.
Us getting together to bitch and moan about whatever.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love the client list or the client meetings, because then you get to, put a face to the name, and you can get to know the people personally and be like, oh, right. We've been talking over the phone and over Zoom for like a month, but now we get to hang out and we can grab beers afterwards or whatever. Right. It makes the projects just so much more fun and engaging. Chris, you work out at M-Hub, right? I've been thinking about trying to find a co-working space like that. Have you found that to be helpful at all?
I have. It's been good so far. But the interesting thing is that they've actually done some interesting things around trying to get joint work for people that are there even. So doing like they contract out the gig as the organization, and then they take a small cut, and then they pass it through to the consultants on site. And that's been good for like really big clients that I could never talk to otherwise, ones in the area. But mostly it's just that social connection piece, like Peter and Eric are talking about. Like it's just that seeing humans is, even if you're not interacting with them on a professional level, it's just sometimes having other humans around that is why I did it. I may have told the story on the show before, but like I was sitting in my apartment, working remote for Supplyframe, and it was, that was all going well. But like it was 2 days after, like I had a meeting at 9 p.m. or something like that, and I did a bunch of other work. It was like 1 a.m, and I fall back into bed and I go, oh, forgot to schedule that meeting. And then I remember that I hadn't spoken out loud in the past 2 days prior to that. So that's when I joined M-Hub. As one does, when you feel like you're actually talking to yourself. So,
right.
Yeah. It's tough though, right? I mean, some of it is just the base human stuff, and some of it is that professional, how do you actually connect with a client, right? I mean, it's hard you need that connection pretty much, or else why are people paying attention to you? Why are they deciding to pay you? All these things that are just important consulting type thing. I mean, really just work things, right? So maybe you guys have had experiences with that of not being able to get their attention because you haven't met them in person. I don't know how much you're sourcing work remote versus like what's the split you'd say local versus remote for each of you?
I've found that I'd probably say 95% of the work I've gotten has been through someone I knew that I worked for before in person. I mean, that's been almost all my work is either that person or a connection or a personal reference. Like I've gotten such little amounts of work through the internet or advertising or that kind of stuff that I've tried.
Yeah, the internet thing is, I was contacted a few times by people that were semi-interested, but you never know how really interested they are. And unfortunately, I think pretty much all of those encounters ended up being, it's like, oh, we can't even afford that. It's like, oh, did you even think about it?
Yeah.
Yeah, but
for material and your time.
Yeah, I had some really crazy stuff coming. It's like people contacting me related to the UAV stuff. And they were like, I want to build this thing that is like super amazing and goes all around the world and da-da-da-da-da. And I'm like, okay, and what is your funding? Because this won't be cheap. And they're like, well, I have no idea. We will get back to you. Well, it's how many years later? No.
Right.
Yeah.
It turns out that guy wanted money. We dropped him like a bad habit.
You can really sort people out when you start asking for people to write checks.
Yeah, right.
You know, it's like you first question is what's your funding situation, and then we're like, oh, we got tons of funding, we're really well funded, and it's like, okay, that sounds great. So here's what it usually costs, and let's get started. And let's kick off an hourly agreement, and we'll figure out what you need to get done. And then they realize, you know, maybe they're not as far down the road as they thought.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, how reluctant people are to go into hourly contracts. This is always such a pain. It's like you guys probably have the same issue where it's like, okay, this person has this project and you're like, well, my hourly rate is so and so, and they're like, oh, well, can you estimate how much this project will cost overall? And it's like, I could maybe, but this will be very rough and you will have to pay me hourly. And they are still, I don't know. How do you deal with this?
Yeah. But on the flip side, I understand what they're asking for, because like I'm looking at having a bunch of work done on my house, and you know, getting an estimate is a challenge, but I don't want to sign a guy on hourly and then find out $20,000 later that he's only a quarter done with the job.
Right.
No, of course. I understand where it is coming from, but I had a few projects that I took on as a project estimate. It's like, okay, lump sum, this is the project. And every time I lost on this. And
Is that right?
Yeah. It never worked out. It was always a moving target, always new requirements from the client. It was quite unpleasant at the end. And yeah, I don't really want to work with these people anymore. It's really unpleasant.
Well, the way I dealt with that is I won't. So I love fixed bid contracts. They're actually my favorite way to work, because then I don't feel like, you know, if I've got a fixed bid contract, I don't feel bad about going on a run and thinking about a bunch of different ideas, or like, you know, going swimming or hanging out with my dog and thinking about ideas. Where if I'm charging by the hour, I really feel like, you know, anytime I'm on the clock, I'm 100% on the clock. So if I can do fixed bid, I much prefer it. But I won't enter a fixed bid unless we have not only a set of deliverables, so like these are the things I'm going to do for you, but also acceptance criteria. So here are the tests we're going to run, and these are the outcomes that we need in order for this to be considered a completed contract. And so if I have both of those things, I mean, if I have both of those things, I can get pretty accurate with the estimates, and I'm usually within like 5 or 10%.
That is a good tip, yeah. The projects that I had were usually really new things from scratch.
Research-based stuff.
Research-based,
You can't do that fixed bid.
I mean, that is kind of interesting thing. It's almost like, is this engineering or is it science, or like where does it fall in between the two, right? And it sounds like, Peter, the stuff you were doing were more science-y, hey, let's see where this all goes kind of thing.
Yeah, it's like you have some like initial requirement that says like, okay, we want to build some like electronic circuit that does a thing, but then you're like, well, but now we have to switch microprocessors and completely rewrite the firmware because it doesn't meet the requirements anymore, and they are not willing to rewrite the contract and pay again. You know, it's like it's difficult.
Yeah, I've actually had a split of about half of them being fixed and half being more open. And I totally agree with Dave. The times I've gotten burned is when I didn't have a set requirement of here's what we're going to do in the project, right? And here's what here's what the finished product's going to be. But when I've had those kind of things, I've stuck to smaller projects or fixed bids, and it's worked out.
Okay, so let's summarize real quick. So run down the list of, so each of you, Dave, you go first. So what's the remote to local, and then what's your fixed bid to hourly, like percentage wise?
Sure. So my remote to local, I just moved less than a year ago to Rochester, New York from Denver. So
yes, we know, Dave.
Yeah, so it's like
I helped him move.
Yeah, Chris is in the truck with me from Denver to Chicago. It was right. Awesome. Wow. But I'd say before then I was probably, I don't know, maybe 30% local, 70% remote, and now it's 100% remote. And I imagine soon I'll get some local clients, but it takes a while to break in.
Got it.
And then fixed versus hourly. Well, what I do, so to your point, guys. If I don't have the requirements and the acceptance criteria, I say, well, hey, let's do this. Let's do an hourly agreement for now. And let's have every 10 hours, we'll check in. So I'll explain to you, hey, I'm at 10 hours. Are you okay with the way things are going? Should we continue, or do you want to cut it off? And then we'll use that. We'll do as many 10-hour segments as we need in order to get to the point where we can write acceptance criteria and spec doc. So then they have some idea, like, well, they're not going to be writing blank checks for forever.
Right. That's good.
But then I have some R&D time where I can kind of monkey around with it. So given that, I'd say probably maybe half of my work, maybe 3/4 is fixed bid. And then the other half, or 25%, is hourly.
Okay. So 75-25 hourly.
Yeah, I'd say that. But it's always so fluid because there's clients that want to do that hybrid arrangement.
Yeah. Well, Peter, I'm going to have you go last because I think that you're a special case because you're not doing as much consulting.
Yeah.
Eric, what about you?
So I'm probably 80 or 90% local, and then the last 10, 20 is remote. And then on the other stuff, I'm probably a third fixed and 2/3 more open-ended. And my open-ended ones have ended up being more like, we want you 20 hours a week, like kind of an agreement where we say, we want you to be available for us, 20 to 25 hours a week, and come into a meeting and those kind of things.
So it's almost like a retainer at that point.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Hey, when they did that deal with you, Eric, did they, if they didn't use the hours, did you still charge them for it?
Yep.
Yeah. I had one client ask to have the deal, but if it was underbid, then they wanted the guarantee of 20 hours a week, but they didn't want to pay if it was not used. It's like, well, wait a minute.
Every time I've done that, actually, I've done it 3 times now. I'm doing one now. They've had so much work that I meet that 20 hours every week. Like, I've never had a case where it's gone more than a few days.
And then you just cut it off, though. Is that like you're like, all right, I'm done, see ya?
Yep.
Is that like,
yeah. Or I've made a deal where if it's something really busy, I've worked more that week, and then the next week I've taken that 10 hours off or something like that.
Sure. That's almost close to like a part-time job at that point, like a contract versus a consultant.
A little bit. It does, but at the same time, since you're not an employee, you don't have some of the same. They can't say you're going to stay tonight because you're.
Right.
So
Peter, what about you?
Well, as you mentioned before, it's like, for me, it's probably 75% actually still working for myself and for 1BitSquared. And
okay.
the rest,
so you're saying your product business. Yeah, that's
my own business. So
your product business versus your consulting. So you're saying only a fraction of your time is anyways.
Yeah, and in the past, I had several clients that were project based, and that was it. And this was developing some specific for them. And then more recently, and these were all remote things, like in Europe even.
Oh, okay.
And now more recently, I'm doing something local, and this is hourly, and it is basically, these are great people to work with because they are quite flexible. On the other hand, they want a continuous progress, so it's more on the level of 1 day a week or 2 days a week I work basically for them, without the requirement of going into an office, and this is pretty nice. So
Yeah.
That sounds like a great arrangement.
Yeah.
What would you guys say is your best client too? I mean, like best type of client, you know, because it sounds like, you know, everybody has their preferences on how they want to work and everything, but it's also sounds like there's a client archetype here that you would chase if you could, if you had your choice.
I actually like having the kind of 20 hours a week client as my base. And then a small project here and there that kind of comes and goes. Because then it gives me some flexibility to do those other small projects and not worry about, you know, do I have enough money this month to cover everything?
Oh, okay. So that's like that earns the rent and the food check, and then
Yeah,
the other
exactly.
stuff's for fun, a little more risky.
Right.
Yeah, I can have to agree 100% with that. It's like this is the arrangement I have at the moment is pretty much ideal.
Yeah, I got to tell you, I've never had stability in the 9 years that I've been doing this. Like that sounds
Dave.
awesome.
Thanks for that.
Good luck, Chris. But having that 20-hour week job that may be like, okay, this is going to last for a year.
Yep.
I've that sounds great. I've not had that. Instead, I've kind of structured. I've structured my life so that I have the expectation of uncertainty, and so I've got things so that if there's things that can be delayed, I can move them around. And then when things really need to happen very quickly, I have the flexibility to do that. Because I don't know what it's like to have that like 20-hour week retainer.
Well, and I wouldn't say it's all that stable. It's because I always assume it can end any day, right? But it is different than having just lots of different projects for sure.
Yeah, because that's my attitude.
It's not like an actual job where you have some safeties and benefits and everything, and that's why this is, I think, also the source of a lot of people not understanding why consultants are charging as much as they do usually, is because they don't understand. It's like, but you are not paying insurance, you are not obligated to have them employed and not being able to fire them like overnight, and many other things that people like dismiss and don't think about until they actually have to start hiring people or consultants. I don't know.
Yeah, actually, so former guest Philip Frieden actually wrote a document about this, and I linked this to you guys, but I'll put this in the show notes too. But it was basically like he wrote an interview with himself about consulting, and that was one of the big things he wrote about. Obviously, you need obviously stateside is going to be different than other places for insurance and stuff like that, but just generally the stability piece is not guaranteed.
Right.
You know, it's funny, Chris, when I went out to start my own consulting business, you sent me this link and I bookmarked it and it's still bookmarked because it's so good.
This is a different one though. So the Unix Wiz is a different one.
Oh, okay. I thought you were talking about the other one.
Yeah, so there's so Fliptronics is the one I was talking about just now, and that's Philip's. The other one that Dave mentioned is So You Want to Be a Consultant. This is one that I send to people all the time, and it's the top line is, why work 8 hours a day for someone else when you can work 16 hours a day for yourself? I don't remember when I found this thing, but it's just like the snarky attitude of it all. I think I've mentioned on the show a couple times too. It's good stuff.
You also have things like tools, like an oscilloscope, laptop. I mean, I had my laptop one day just die out of the blue. And so here I was, I didn't have an employer, so I had to go find a, $1,000 laptop to that same day so I can keep working, right? So
yeah. And all that stuff is full price when you're like, I need this today. Okay, write a check. Like there's no hanging out waiting for a deal to come by for Black Friday or whatever.
Right.
It's very different buying things for your business versus buying things personally.
Yes.
Yeah, it's like you cannot throw your weight around and say like, dude, give me a better price here.
Yeah, I need it.
Don't
now.
you know who I am? I'm
The
Chris
big
Gamble.
overhead. Chris
The
Gamble.
one-person company that you'll never hear from again once I've bought your product.
The bigger problem for me is the time overhead. So
true.
When I was working in the corporate offices, everybody be like, man, the consultant always leaves Thursday and everybody has to come in on Friday. And now that I'm a consultant, it's like, man, I could spend one day a week doing whatever cleanup needs to be done for the business. So
you're talking like
totally
overhead
reasonable.
and
like time overhead, like
yep.
if you need to run invoices or if you need, like, I was just cleaning my lab, that takes me half a day. Normally a company would have somebody come in and do that for you. Or your part breaks or your tool breaks or something like that, everything takes time, and that's before you start maintaining a website and
Right.
doing the whole bookkeeping thing.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Even things like installing software, sometimes I'm like, do I charge this to a client? Because, it took me half an hour to install some new piece of software. Well, that doesn't seem fair to the client, but
Right.
So here is the charge for the 2 days I spent installing Verilog or Vivado.
Right. Right. I also have a bill for all the hair that I tore out. I need to get a weave now. Yeah. No, it's true. And I think, I did not ask Alicia in time. Obviously, Alicia from Embedded is another person I bug about consulting stuff all the time too. And she gave me great advice about like, look, if it's not something you'd be doing if it's something you wouldn't be doing otherwise, you should be billing it to a client. But I think that you're right that like, where do you balance that stuff? It's kind of like the guilt and the overhead of doing these things. It's like, well, this is for my computer. So what about it's on my computer? Isn't my software, that kind of thing.
Right.
Yeah, or like I'm installing this for all my clients. Like, okay,
Yeah.
I got to update Altium, and that screwed something up, so I got to go back and dig through stuff. That could take a couple hours, and like I use that package for everybody, so I can't bill that to anybody.
Yeah.
Do you guys use time tracking systems? And basically, like I'm now sitting here working for this client, so the timer is running for them. And
yeah, if I'm hourly,
Yes.
I'm like real hardcore about it. My wife comes in and asks me a question about something, I turn it off so that I can talk to her. Because the thing is, you never want to ever have even a hint of impropriety there, especially since I do so much remote work.
Yeah.
Right.
As soon as you like, there's a lot of trust built into that when you have this hourly arrangement and they're not there when you're working or whatever.
Right.
So like, I just keep it so tight, or to be honest, the tie goes to the client. So it's like, should I bill this or shouldn't I? I usually lean towards no, don't bother billing it, because as soon as it doesn't smell good, then the trust is broken, and then it doesn't matter if it was totally reasonable. It's really the trust that matters.
yeah, I agree. And which software do you use? I use Toggle, for example.
I just use my accounting software actually. Zoom. Not Zoom. Zoho. I use Zoho Books for everything.
I use an Android app called Timesheet.
Man, you guys are all way more high tech than me. I just use a spreadsheet.
Dave's like, I use a clock.
Yeah, clock, spreadsheet, done.
Yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, that's really what they're all coming down to. It's a database or a spreadsheet, right? But I think it's interesting. For me, I always ignore apps. Like I do better when I'm actually filling it out later, and I tag like each thing I'm doing. So, but it's tough. I mean, and not only that, there's so many options out there these days. I mean, there's apps for everything, right?
Yes.
So it's like you read like a top 20 things for a consultant to use to track time. It's like, well, that doesn't help.
All those productivity apps, my application is really simple, right? Like time start, time finished.
Yeah.
I always find that productivity applications that solve really easy, simple problems are a bigger hassle because they're always changing it, updating it, monkeying around with it. That's deprecated or whatever. It's just like, oh my God, just give me a spreadsheet.
Well, but Dave, you're also an analog engineer, so you've got the built-in like grumpiness.
That is true. You damn kids with your apps.
Right. Dave was a 40 or 85-year-old man at the age of 25. So, okay, so how does this? Okay, so we're talking about tracking time. We've been talking about software. We've been talking about all this stuff. A lot of this is just logistical stuff, and it does sound like there is a ton of overhead and just dealing with all that crap. But what about the work itself? I mean, like, what does that look like for you guys? I mean, is it design work? Is it review work? Is it building stuff? What does it actually come down to? What are your specialties?
Oh, yeah. See, we've been talking about all the grumpy stuff. This is really why I've been consulting for so long, is getting to do a lot of jobs. Like the diversity of work and the depth of work are both excellent. It's really hard to find a career job where you get both diversity and depth. And, when you're on a team doing project A, and then 6 months later you're on a different team doing project B, you learn a ton about a ton of stuff, and you're doing really neat, like you're building things. It's just so interesting to be able to bounce between the topics, learn everything, get the job done, and then do something totally different the next year.
I totally agree. Having the diversity has been the best part about consulting. And for a while there, I kind of found a niche where there was companies that wanted to hire just one person to do the project. So I would do everything from, help figure out what the requirements were, to drawing a schematic, to doing the layout, to hand building prototypes, to writing firmware, so we could go from, they were smaller projects that have a, microcontroller in them, but I could go from beginning to end and they could take it off into production. And they liked that because they're just one person then.
Yeah, I do those all the time and it is great. I love those jobs.
The diversity is great. Actually, this is why I keep doing 1-bit squared and making my own products, because I basically am pretty much fully vertically integrated, as people would call it. It's including having a pick and place machine in the garage and like assembling stuff and things like that, It's I really enjoy the fact that I can manage a bit, like, this threat of burnout is much lower, because one day you do one thing that occupies a different side of your brain, and another day you do something different that occupies a different side of your brain. And working for a company at one project, it's much more likely, because of the monoculture of the thing you are doing, you end up being much more like physically worn out faster. That's the feeling I'm getting. And I did like interviews a few years ago just to see, it's like if companies would want me if I needed to. And they were like, yeah, but you can't do embedded hardware design and software. It doesn't compute.
Right. Right. What would your title be? How would we move you up in the corporate hierarchy, right?
Yeah, exactly. And it's like, these were like modern, like Silicon Valley companies that you would expect them to understand that crossover.
Yeah.
Yeah, but from their perspective, I get what they're trying to do, right? They're trying to, the whole idea of a company is you get a bunch of people together, you get people to specialize, get extraordinarily good at this one thing, and then turn the crank. Let's do it for another project. Let's build and build and build. So I get what they're after and why that makes sense. But Chris, when we were in that design group at Keithley, it was fun because we got to do all those different things. Like we were talking manufacturing all the time. Yep. We're talking to part procurement. We were talking engineering. We were talking to customers. And it was great. But if you wanted to move up from that role, there weren't a ton of options. Like you had to basically go to manufacturing engineering or go to design engineering, or you had to go to the labs group or whatever. And that was one of the things I was excited to consult, is you just get to kind of bounce around.
Yeah. Yeah, it's true. I mean, it is tough to kind of fit that in. I mean, like, I think the best case scenario for a lot of people would be to do like what you guys are talking about, to do a little bit of everything, to sample the different styles and build the skills and everything, but then have the stability of a paycheck. Which is interesting too, because some people think, oh well, the consulting side of things, you'll just do all that stuff and make more money. You'll just because you have a higher hourly rate, you'll make more money. And I heard, was it Eric snickering? I'm sure you're all snickering, right? I mean, like, it's the thing is like it's just the lack of stability around it means that you're probably not billing. So that's what I wanted to ask next is, like, on average, I think I messaged Dave the other week and I was like, hey, I had a 0-hour week. Is that normal? Is that like, I feel really terrible about this. And he's like, yeah, well, I don't know. What are the usual like build hours when you guys are doing hourly?
It kind of depends, where I'm at, but I found that reaching like 40 hours of build a week is like, happens very rarely for me, to tell you the truth. And
it takes 60 hours of actual work.
Yeah, it takes, you got another 50% on top of that to keep on top of everything.
And, like 10 years ago, I was offered a job. I'd been a contract worker instead of a consultant with Intel, and they offered me a job. And I realized recently, if I'd have taken that job and not gotten a raise, over the last 10 years, I probably would have been about the same place or better off. Yeah. I mean, and I don't know if that's true for the rest of you guys, but it's definitely ups and downs for.
Well, and like I said at the beginning, it was getting it off the ground. There were some lean years there.
Yeah.
And that really messes up the average. So like now I might get a comparable job somewhere, but when you take into account those first few years where you're not making much money, it's like, maybe I should have just stayed at the corporate job.
Right.
Yeah, for me it is because of the other stuff that I'm doing. It's also it's like, I don't know, 5 to 10 hours a week. That's pretty much all I can hope for, which I actually want. It's like the funny thing is, because my setup is so different, I am weighing my options and thinking, it's like, should I do the consulting job or should I put more hours into my own business? And it is,
Yeah, you've got an opportunity
for
cost
it.
there.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
So I have kind of the opposite where I have a product business also, but it's only about 10% of my income right now. And I'd like to do more with it. But when I'm faced with, well, I can do client work and get paid, or I can work on my business that isn't making a profit yet, it's hard to always justify that. But
yeah, no, that's true all around. I mean, I think all of us have different businesses than just consulting, which is another interesting thing. I mean, it sounds like Peter's the furthest towards product. Eric, you have product as well with Low Voltage Labs. Dave, you have Blue Stamp Engineering, which is kind of a seasonal thing. And then I have my course. And if you call the amp hour business, I suppose I have that. But, and yeah, I mean, I think it is just like the highest likelihood of making your paycheck kind of thing.
Yeah. Well, to answer your question, Chris, about the 0 hour billable week, I used to flip out about those too. But to be honest, once you have the 40 or 50 hour or 60 hour billable week, like when you go through a couple of those cycles where you're like, oh my God, all I want is a 0 hour week. Like I would love to have a couple weeks where there's 0 hours billable.
Yeah.
And once you go through a few of those cycles, it's like, okay, this is the way it's just going to be.
Right. It's just those ebbs and flows of everything. Yeah. And it was, and to my, that week's credit, I mean, it was the IMTS week when I was doing a bunch of meetups and meeting people, and that's already turned into contacts for future jobs that have already started to work out. So like that alone, it's like that's reassuring, but it's that kind of like local optimization versus like, overall maximum optimization of like weeks versus months versus years, kind of timelines of projects and stuff like that. And obviously I'm very close to the early stages of all this stuff. So I'm still,
that's actually for me, the most challenging thing is, like I always say with the client, like, let's figure out what's best for the project and do that. So, that can be really frustrating when I like send a board out and the client wanted to go like low cost. They wanted to go macro fab. So I've got like a month before it's going to come back. And then I was expecting this other client to be ready so that I could start on their thing and like the load balancing thing. And then they're like, oh, we're not ready yet because we're trying to get, what's that?
Like sequencing of work from one job to the next.
Exactly. And then you're like, okay, I'm ready for this work. And they're like, oh, we had this mechanical problem. It's going to be another couple weeks. I was like, no, I had this time. I was so ready. I was going to do so well. But then there's no control. It's
the projects. You have 5 people that you have to handle in one day.
Right. They all want to deliver on the 15th of the month.
Yeah, I think the time management is my number one problem that I can't seem to figure out. Because like you say, someone will say, oh, we're going to start next week with this project. And so you kind of try to plan around that, and then they change their mind, or like something happens and just, it seems almost impossible to plan ahead like that.
Or randomly out of the blue, they write you an email. It's like, so can you have like 7 of those ready for next week because we need it?
Yes.
And so what do you do then, Peter? I mean, is that something you actually give credence to, or do you kind of say, well, I'll go crazy?
Yeah. I curse to myself and then I try to make it happen.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Because if that's what the project needs, because that's the thing is, I've been developing projects for a long time, and that's the nature of it. So I've just succumbed to it, and if I can, I'll say yes for a client to get what they need to get done. And even if I can't, like sometimes I'll sit down with my wife and be like, Bridget, this is about to happen, and
you're not going to see me for a couple weeks.
I'm going to need some help for a while, and we work, if we try and find a way to make it happen,
especially when it is in my case, when it's like PCBs for something, then it is like big thinking. It's like, do I rush order those and pay twice the price, or don't I? Do they really need it tomorrow, or can we wait for 3 days?
That's my favorite thing to ask, is like, so that's the first place I go to, is like, well, let's just buy our time from the PCB fab. And then if they're like, no, we want to spend an extra couple $100, it's like, well, you don't really want it then that fast.
Right.
But if they're like, yes, $1,000, buy it. It's like, okay, if you guys are in it, then
well, that is an interesting, like, because it also kind of speaks to what you were saying about the hourly stuff too. It's like, how serious are you? It's like dollars kind of speak, or they are the ultimate deciding factor.
Well, it's also, I think, learning the client, because I've had clients who seem to like everything's a fire drill, and really it's not. Like it's kind of their personality sometimes, you know. Like, like everything is super important. Everything has to be done today. And then I've learned with those people, well, that's not really true. That's what they always say.
Well, what does that manifest as? And so like you would take action on something and they'd be like, well, we didn't really care about that. Like what actually happened?
What would happen is I would jump on things quick and try to like meet their demands, and then something else would delay it, or or they'd be like, oh, no, it's fine actually. Like it just it would manifest in things not really being that important later on. So then I would have to learn, okay, they always say this, so it's fine to get it done in 2 days. So
wow. Okay.
Yeah, I think it shows itself the best when you are like, okay, we need it next week so we can test it and do this and that, and you deliver it. And then ask them, so did you, like, by the end of that week, did you test it? It's like, oh, no, it's still sitting on my desk.
Oh, man.
Well, I've had that happen many times.
Do they push back, though? Then they're like, oh, wait, you charged extra hours for this, or you charged extra rush shipping. Do they push back on you then? Because that's the thing I wonder about is, like, if they ask for it, you can at least point to it and say, well, you said you wanted it. So have you had bad experiences with that or what?
No, I haven't actually. No, if they've asked for it rushed and I've had to pay extra for PCBs or shipping or my time, I've never had a pushback on that.
Okay, that's good.
Yeah, but I've done the same thing, but I've never spent client money without permission. So like, if it's like, hey, we're gonna need to spend $1,000 to get these boards turned around quickly, they know about that in advance,
right? So
that they can give approval.
That's good.
I have been in a situation where a client wanted, like a whole design, and they wanted it very fast because they were going to have somebody else do it, and it didn't work out, and so they kind of wanted me to make up the time, and so I quoted them a different rate than they were used to, and that it was certainly a strain on the business relationship, but once I explained to them like what the situation was and what they were really asking, they were totally okay. So I think it comes down to communication, making sure everybody knows before the work starts what they're asking for and what they're going to get.
Yeah, and I always think about setting expectations is a huge thing. Whether you're doing an hourly project or if you're going to work 20 hours a week, talking ahead of time, like how much time am I really going to be in your office? How much time, do you expect me to like be available by text, 24/7? Like, so those kind of things are really important to work out in the beginning.
Have you turned down jobs because they were more stringent than you thought? Or I mean, like, have you guys, I guess this is a general question I want to ask anyways, is like, have you guys fired clients? Have you had to have really tough conversations with clients? I've
fired a client. And it really came down to, I called it the 3 strikes, because it was an hourly job, but he was very demanding on my time. Like if he'd send me a package, if the tracking number showed it had been delivered, he would text me and ask me if I had started working on it yet. And then on top of that,
stalker.
Yeah. And he paid late. And I didn't like his project. So at the end of the day, I just said, I can't do this anymore. And I was kind of worried he wouldn't pay his last 2 bills, and he actually ended up paying them. So
Dave and Peter are fine with everything. They are happy and cheery, apparently.
Yeah,
okay, great. Yeah,
I
Dave never spoke a bad word of anyone. Definitely not over a beer.
I've never had a tough. I've had uncomfortable conversations, but like Eric said, it's very important to set expectations, and you have those conversations. The other thing is like uncomfortable conversations don't age well. So
that's a good point. Yep.
And that's true, just as true with clients as it is with your wife, as it is with your kids, as it is with anybody. It's like, okay, we need to have this conversation, and let's just do it.
And when you say don't age well, you mean don't sit on the conversation and wait around for when it gets worse, that kind of thing?
Yeah, if you wait, it's only going to be worse.
Right.
So
it's a time bomb.
You just gotta figure out what it is. And the other thing that I found is like, if I was in their shoes, what would I want? Like, I've grown a great deal of empathy for other people in being a consultant, because you are asking for a lot of money and you are asking for a lot of trust. And so when you put yourself in their position, it's like, well, if I was them, how would I feel about this? Well, I wouldn't feel too good, but I want to acknowledge that and make sure that we can all get on the same page and make sure it's something that can all work out.
Yeah. Yeah, the phrase that you taught me recently, I liked. What was that phrase, Dave?
Oh, there's so many one-liners.
I know, there's a lot of one-liners. Me and Dave talk a lot.
Yeah.
This was, I think it was, I don't want you to pay me too much, but I also don't want you to pay me too little.
No, it was, well, this is when I have the discussions about fixed bid versus hourly, and everybody wants fixed bid because then they can put a budget in a spreadsheet and they know what they're going to get for what, and so I say, well, if we don't have the requirements and we don't have the acceptance criteria, I don't think we really know where the end point is, and I don't want to overcharge you, and I definitely don't want to undercharge you.
That's the one. Yeah.
So
yeah, that's good.
So let's come find a way so we can get there.
That's a good one.
Peter, have you had to fire any clients? You're just gonna stay mum on this whole thing.
Oh no!
You've only fired yourself.
Firing a client right now. You're firing a client.
No.
He's like texting someone.
Yeah.
This has been something I've been meaning to do for a while. So
no, I don't think I was in the position of no soup for you. But well, I definitely thought about it a few times. That does happen.
Oh, sure.
And you are like, it's more of the thing. It's like, okay, we will finish this project and I will just not do another one with that person. It's not like firing. It's just basically saying, it's like, okay, this engagement is ending anyway, so let's not do another one.
Right. Yep.
And regarding the setting of expectations, it's like, it couldn't be truer. The problem is also that I've seen is a language barrier. It's like, for example, if you say, I should have it done by, it doesn't mean it will be done by, it means it should be done by
this is
that.
Speaking as an engineer versus speaking as a management person, right? Is that kind of what you're talking about?
Yeah, and it's like, I ran into that problem recently, and it's like, I still have to learn how to phrase things so that they're clearer to people that might not be native speakers.
Yeah, I stopped using the word should all the time. And actually lately, I've stopped accepting it. So like when people will say, I should be available tomorrow at 3, and I'll respond to the email and be like, okay, well, let me know when you're ready to confirm that time.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah. Good. But it's I use should on purpose. If I know I will do a thing by a certain date, then I will tell you, obviously. But especially when you are depending on other people, it's like you order stuff, you order parts, you order PCBs, like anything can happen. And suddenly you can get the information. It's like, oh, so by the way, we have Chinese holidays now for 2 days, so your thing will be delayed, even if they might even not tell you that they have that. It just is not being shipped on time. Right. So
that's fun. That's real fun.
Again, I'm falling back into the grumpy old man. It's
fun. I think that's kind of. I think the grumpy consultant is grumpy for a reason, right? I mean, I've met other. I mean, you got to put a good face on either way, right? But it's people that understand the state of the world, and then also what they're usually asked for, like that's a tough balance to strike, I think. At least from what I've seen.
I got to tell you that the professional face that you put on, I so love that, because thinking back when I worked in the corporate environment, there'd be a lot of people that, since you're seeing them every day, all day, the personal issues would
Dave's talking
would
about
be hard
right
to
now.
ignore.
He's talking
Chris,
about
you remember when those two guys got into a fist fight over a project at Keithley?
I don't remember that.
Oh man, two guys legitimately got, like, good friends. We used to play football together, get beers, all that kind of. They legitimately got into a fist fight. And, like, stuff like that happens. And what's nice is when you're a consultant, you can be like, I don't have to talk to you for a week, so I'm gonna switch it all to email, and then we'll be able to keep going. And it's nice to be able to step back, where in the corporate environment it's not possible. I I loved hanging out with all the people that I worked with, but there were some times where different people would get on my nerves, and it's like, oh my God, I got to go tomorrow, and I got to be in that 8 o'clock meeting with them, and I'm just going to try not to say anything I shouldn't.
The perks of the virtual office.
Yeah, exactly. It really lets, I think it's like the grease that lets the gears run. It helps a lot.
Like, it goes back to having that diversity too. Like, I feel like I get to meet a group of people that I do a project with for 6 months or whatever, and then I move on to another group, and so you don't have some of those like long-term issues.
Yeah, the baggage.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, I was talking to someone about space projects the other day, and just like, some of those people, like, you see them like celebrating when the thing lands on a asteroid or a planet or whatever the hell it is.
It's a good feeling when suddenly your thing is in space.
Oh, I'm sure, but I'm just saying that the timelines on those is 10 to 20 years, right? And it's like, oh crap, okay, it's a lot of the same stuff every day, and it's a lot of the same people. So that's fun.
Fortunately, the CubeSat stuff is becoming more prevalent, and the timeframes are much shorter these days.
That's a good point. Okay, so speaking of time frames, we are already 45 minutes in. Holy crap. 50 minutes in. So I wanted to get to some of the Twitter questions. I had asked people on Twitter about the fact that we'd be talking here, and some people had some questions here. I'm going to start with the one that was not a question, but it was just a phrase: imposter syndrome. Have you felt it? Do you feel it right now? And when will you feel it in the future? Yeah. How do you deal with it is probably the best question, actually.
Wow.
That's a hard question.
So actually, one thing that's helped me is there's another consultant that is here locally that I have known for 20 years. And he is really good at, I think, selling himself, but also he sells me better than I sell myself. So, so talking to him sometimes and having him like be this, person who's in a common kind of field doing the same thing I'm doing has really helped me, having that link, because he'll be like, oh, you've done all these cool projects and you've done this and that and you can do this new one, like so
instead of you being like, well, I don't know if I could do that exact thing, that kind of thing.
Yeah, good friends are actually the good source of correcting oneself self-esteem. I think it's it's like ones that you trust that they have the technical knowledge and actually look up to is even better.
Yep.
You're like, okay, he's better than me, and if he says I'm doing okay, then it's hopefully really okay.
Yeah, very true. Yes.
So it's all about just the reference points and having some backing foundations on those kind of things.
Yeah, I like to embrace it, and I refer to it as known risks.
Known risks.
Oh yeah.
I'll just
Ignorance,
tell
known risk.
It's like the the academic who has the future work section. It's like, these are the things that I was going to do that I didn't do. Known risks is like, I realize that this is going to be a challenge, and I'm not entirely sure how this is going to turn out. So I just want to be upfront with it.
And the important thing is, you have to communicate it to the client and not be afraid of admitting. It's like, I have never done that before. I might fail. Are you okay with that? And if the client is a good client, they will be like, yeah, we will see where it goes. We will do that anyways.
Yeah.
And then you feel much like it's easier on you than having to like fake it.
Yes.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
And I actually had a client twice now who we had that conversation where I said, I've never done, this sort of thing before, and their response was, well, we can't find anybody else, so I guess
that's the other thing.
Right, that's a good point. The overhead of finding somebody else.
If they can get somebody on what's that site, Elance or whatever it is.
Oh yeah.
If it was that easy, then they just get somebody on Elance and pay them like $30 an hour and it'd be done.
Yep.
But and nobody's going to engage any of us if it's easy.
That's totally true.
Point.
Yeah.
Yep. Okay, how about another question here? Here's an interesting one. Because again, it was not really a real question, but I think the underlying thing makes sense. When your startup client who suddenly gets funding is wooed and ultimately stolen by a bigger design firm promising the world, ... how does one manage one's anger? It's a great question by
I personally go on a lot of runs.
Okay.
I like to.
So that's mental health stuff. But I think the bigger question here is, how do you deal with being the smaller fish in the pond, especially when there's design firms out there that are the big fish, right?
But that's not necessarily an asset to be like. So don't get me wrong.
Sure.
For some projects, big design firms are 100% worth it. Like, if it makes sense. And I've even been in a position where I've been on a project and I'm like, guys, we need like a legitimate design firm to get in on this, because this is, you guys are starting from scratch on a big project, and like for me to do it, and then for me to refer other people in other disciplines to do it. Given
okay. So you're saying like company comes to you and says, we want to build a Bluetooth widget encased in plastic that does A, B, and C, and it has an app, and it does this and this and this, and it has field tests or something.
Yeah, I might be able to get a project like that put together with a bunch of other people. But if there's like a significant project like that wheelchair project I did for Indigo, it was like, guys, I'm not going to get a team together to do this. It's going to be a ton of work on a ton of different people. So like, it's an asset. But on the flip side, big design houses are not better than lone gunners for everything. Like, I'm way more nimble and flexible, and certainly less expensive than
yeah, that's a good point too. They might charge
somebody else
3 times your rate just because they have overhead and everything else.
Yeah,
right?
and they're not going to iterate as much, or almost all of them won't be as flexible, and they won't be as fast, and they won't be like, if somebody calls me at 3:00 on Friday and be like, hey, I know you're trying to order that board on Monday. We need to change this, change that, change this, change. Like, I can roll with that kind of stuff. Whereas, if the project manager's gone home that day and the engineer's only there, he's going to be sitting there and be like, well, I don't know. I got to talk to the guy, and we got to see about this. We may have a meeting. So, there's pros and cons to everything. So I wouldn't feel, if somebody wants to go to a big design house, I mean, if they've got the money and they think that's what they need, more power to them. But
I've actually worked through some of those design houses. There's one in Portland that they're all purely mechanical. They don't have any people who do electrical. So I've become kind of their go-to person to do smaller projects and to help them out. So
yeah, and I've done that. I've done a little bit of that too, and that works great.
Yeah,
that works great.
Okay, so this leads into another question that we should have probably talked about sooner. But how do you guys get your work? I mean, I guess we kind of covered a little bit of. A lot of it comes through personal connections and stuff like that. But where when you are advertising yourselves or talking about yourselves or finding new points of contact like that, where are you normally getting work from?
Just direct contacts. As I said, it's like the stuff that comes through the internet is usually nothing, anyways.
Yeah.
So you're saying that individuals, you're saying that already knew you.
Yes.
Yeah, it's like it's like knowing at least one intermediary. It's like the 7 indirections thing, but in this case, it's more like 1 or 2
Okay.
at max. It's like usually it's someone who knows my work already, and they're like, "Oh, this is something similar to what I saw you do.
Got it.
Would you be interested?" Or you hang out with some people, and they're like, "Oh, you're interested in this stuff? Can you do that stuff? Oh, awesome. We were looking for someone to do this for a while."
Yeah. Got it. Serendipity by proximity.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. All personal contacts. And then I've also found that like distributor salespeople and FAEs, because they're constantly going around talking to their clients. And so things come up about, a certain FPGA or a certain part. And they're like, oh, we know these people that have done that on previous projects that are consultants. And they refer us. Or also contract manufacturers. I've gotten work through them because their clients are having boards built there and something goes wrong or a part goes obsolete, and I've gotten references to fix those for their clients.
Yeah. I was going through old emails, and Eric, I found one from you that said, "Hey, Ashpart gets references, and sometimes they pass stuff through." I've talked to other CMs that do that. Another one that that I talked to was I think the mechanical stuff is good, but one that I talked to was what was it? I guess it was kind of like a CM as well. So yeah, another CM like you guys mentioned. So, but just these focal points of like people that hear about things. Oh, investors were another one. Sorry, that was another big one. And I think Dave, you've dealt with that a couple times.
Yeah, I've done that. But really, the big one for me is past clients. And my attitude is always, so I haven't had to spend a ton of time doing marketing stuff for a few years now. And I always say, like, if I'm doing something for a client that I maybe shouldn't do, or it's above and beyond or whatever, I refer to that as my marketing time. It's like, make your clients extremely happy, and then you don't have to bother with a website.
Yeah. Oh, that's true.
Good point.
I think so. Here's the reason that I wanted to bring this up too, though, is that so a lot of people listening are thinking like, how can I get into it? That is, I think, the common question that I've gotten as I've started talking about this. At least people have been like, oh, I'm thinking about getting into it, and so then they hear us say, well, past clients or investors or CMs, and it's like, oh shit, well, I don't have any of those things. So I guess the real question here is, for people who are listening, how do they get into it? You know, where do they start
Yeah.
that they get this stuff started?
Yeah, I suppose I had when I got into it, it was I went to a bunch of meetups.
Okay.
And then like the other guys were saying is you're talking to people and like, oh, you know how to do that? I know a guy that needs somebody that knows how to do that. And eventually you can get into this stuff. But going around and talking.
Okay.
Well, I kind of fell into it backwards, to tell you the truth. We had moved to a different city, and I was looking for a job because I've been doing more like contract work, and so I looking for a full-time job. And this buddy of mine said, I've been doing consulting, and this company needs more help. Will you come help out? And that was my first contract thing there, and then from there I just kept going with it. So I think if you know someone who's in that world, that's a great connection.
Got it.
Yeah, that's for sure.
Well, and, Peter, you said that you don't get much from the internet, but I do wonder about having projects online being a little bit visible. Obviously, Peter, your name's on a crap ton of firmware files and stuff like that, and you have projects out there. So does that help at all, or at least from an acknowledgement of your persona online, or does that not matter?
Oh yeah, no, it does help. It's just the feeling I have, especially for the stuff that I'm doing, is like the more open source stuff, like firmware here, files there. The expectation of the people that were approaching me so far were just crazy. They were
just
like,
lower
this
quality
has to be...
of clients, yeah.
Well, it's basically like, so because it is open source, so I can get it virtually for free, right? And
yeah, of course.
It's like, no, Mike, they don't realize your time costs money. But
okay, so you're saying the open source can get your name out there, but
yes,
that it might also attract a little bit more lower quality leads than otherwise.
Yes, but also there is also a flip side to it, which is the positive one, is showing your what you can do. And for me, for example, when I'm trying to find people to work on projects, my work requirement is like, so show me your pull requests on GitHub, so I can judge how well we can work together.
Right.
So this is a very important, in my opinion, it's like any college student should take their time to contribute to an open source project, because this is a very good way of applying. Like when you apply for a job, you can show this and show, I can do this. I can know how VCS works. My code is not super ugly, and I can work with other people and make a pull request and discuss it.
That makes sense, and I think that's good. That's good advice, regardless. Like you're saying, for regular employment as well.
And then hackerspaces, like going there and meeting people that are in the tech industry. It's like, for example, if you're Portland area, go to Dorkbot, Dorkbot PDX. There's so many engineers there. It's like, I know several of my friends are continuously in rotation with different consulting jobs, because they know each other, they meet each other, they hang out with each other, and they recommend each other to their clients.
Yep. Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, and so interesting one is actually someone here, Jose, who's in town here. He actually did start an Upwork, which I was really surprised at when I talked about him about it. But then he kind of kept parlaying that into new stuff. He also does KiCad stuff, so I'll probably talk to him about it at some point. But there are a lot of ways. I think having work out there is easier when you. So like we always say on the show, if you show up at a meetup with something in your hand, that's going to be a lot easier to talk to people about it, especially if you're not super outgoing. And then, so that also, means like work on projects on your own, show up at meetups, or just try and get to know people otherwise, and hackerspaces, whatever. And then maybe even I don't know, how much do you state that you're available for work? Is that something that you do? Do you reach out and say, do you reach out to people and say, hey, I'm kind of in searching mode right now, or do you do anything like that?
Last year was pretty slow for me, and I spent a lot of time reaching out to past clients, to contacts, people I knew, just saying, hey, I've got some spare time right now, and I did a lot of that. So
how did it work out?
Eventually, it got me something, but it took a lot more than I expected.
Interesting.
So, yeah. And I don't know if it was just my network last year was just, slower or what.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I guess it depends on, who you know. Like, especially if you're saying that it is mostly local versus remote, that kind of thing, like where you build your network online or offline, that kind of
Right.
stuff. What about from other, I guess, Dave, you can answer this one. What about from other clients or other consultants, rather?
What do you mean?
Does anyone ever give you work
Oh yeah,
as another consultant?
There's a yeah, right, Chris. You kick me work all the time.
I always joke about that, but Dave gets much of his own work. I always like to.
It's nice to have Chris to talk to and
Right.
say like, oh yeah, I got some time.
Yeah.
I don't know if so I'm always available to talk about projects, and the reason is, a project might take 6 months to get started, and that might take 6 days to get started.
Yeah.
And so if they're in a rush, that's one of my first questions. Like, okay, what's your timeline look like? And they're like, well, we're in the early stages. We're trying to do all this, that, and the other. Then I know that what I can talk to them. If I'm busy as busy can be, I can at least talk to them. And maybe if I'm too busy, I might be able to pass them on to somebody else that I know, or I might be able to connect them down the line or help them somehow. But the only time I'll say like, no, I'm really toast is when I'm actually toast and they're looking to have something done in like the next month or two.
That makes sense. Yeah, it's tough. I mean, like I've been on a couple email chains as well where like I didn't know how to do the thing they were at. They're like, oh, well, we need an FPGA expert. And I'm like, oh, I don't know, or they need this, that, or the other thing. A firmware, super in-depth firmware architect. I went, nope, sorry. So
yeah, but the reality is like you and I would be far better at helping them find somebody than they would be on their own. So
right.
It's always nice to help people out and connect them where you can.
Are there any resources you guys know about that connect consultants together?
I've not seen any. That would be great.
Yeah.
I may have been low level thinking about something like this. So
okay.
All right. I'll send
it would be great.
We got 3 users so far.
For example, there's like my current client. They are like looking for additional hands and I'm having trouble finding someone qualified. So
yeah. And not only that, but being able to cross over to other disciplines too. I mean, I have a mechanical person that I've worked with that I think is great, and trying to make those connections would be fantastic.
Yeah. Okay. Let's get some more Twitter questions in here. Let's see. So that kind of covered how to get new clients. What about like insurance and kind of covering your butt for if you make a product or make a thing that blows up or does something bad? Do you guys carry insurance?
Silence.
All right, I guess I'm not buying insurance anytime soon. Okay.
Well, I guess
Peter made this a good question for you because I mean you manufacture products. I mean, as a manufacturer, do you carry insurance or no?
No.
So here's the thing: I've gone down the insurance road, and the problem is nobody will cover you for mystery product for mystery amount of time for mystery complexity.
Right.
Yes.
So like if you tell them like, yeah, I'm an engineer and today I could design a clock and tomorrow I could design a wheelchair, they're like, okay, so here's what you're gonna do. You're gonna get your clock client to insure their clock. You're gonna get your wheelchair client to insure their wheelchair, which they're gonna have to do if they're gonna sell it or they're gonna get it into big box stores or on Amazon or whatever. So that's kind of the road that I went down with the insurance is like, you can get insurance and like, so that's why I was kind of silent is I didn't want to talk about specific insurance policies because there's not insurance for like a design engineer who's designing mystery stuff. There is. So like you can get professional liability insurance and then that covers all your normal stuff. Like if you have a client over to your lab and they shock themselves, or if you have an employee or a subcontractor over to your lab and they do something they shouldn't do, or they break their skull or whatever, then they cover you. But if you have released a design that's bad, it's really hard to get protection from that because the insurance company doesn't know what they're protecting.
Got it.
So
okay.
that is interesting, but in my previous work life, we did get liability insurance for a product, but it is just for the final product,
right?
Where you described in very minute detail which situations. This is the hard part about those insurances. It's like you have to sit with the person from the insurance and go through all the liability possibilities and imagine anything that could happen so that they can give you a quote how much they want you to pay. And that was my experience with insurance. So I try to avoid quote unquote final products. It's basically all that I do. I try to, well, I don't try. It is just by what it is. It's mostly bare PCBs, which are components or parts of a bigger thing. And so these are not molded plastic finished things that I would be able to even easily get an liability insurance for.
Do you guys have your business as, in my case, I have an LLC to kind of separate that. Do you guys have like a corporation, or how do you handle that?
Yeah, I'm LLC.
Yeah, LLC in my case.
Okay.
Me too.
And this was glad you mentioned that. This was specifically thought like, oh, it has to be an LLC to create this barrier, financially at least.
Right, and that also requires I think me and Dave have talked about this a couple times, but like it's about having like good corporate practices, so you're not like intermingling funds or doing anything stupid on the accounting side, because then if they do come after you, they prove that you've been kind of fast and loose with your money or your jobs or whatever, whatever it is, then they say, oh, by the way, your house, you actually weren't a corporation the whole time, and your house is also liable.
Yeah.
Right.
But
I
I
will
have
say
friends
that there are some good resources for trying to figure out liability insurance and stuff like that with IEEE. So if you're a member of IEEE, they do a bunch of stuff to help you out with understanding all this stuff and what you want to do. So if people are looking at getting into consulting, that would be a great place to start, so you understand where your risks are and what you want to do.
Yeah, that was interesting too, Dave, because you had mentioned that they have a salary survey, which I actually did not. I've never. It's like a purchase thing you can buy for like $30 or something.
Consultant fee survey. Well, it's just a consultant survey, so you get to talk about how many hours you're billing, how much you're charging, stuff like that.
But it seemed like it was pretty skewed towards the Uber Pro kind of like California-based consultant type thing.
What? Yeah, I don't know about that. So yeah, we were talking. I think the average is like 160 an hour or something, and most of them have been working for like 10 years or something like that. I don't know, something like that. But it is helpful if you want to get a glimpse into what it might look for you getting into the game. That would be a great place to start. So you can figure out, okay, how much time should I be looking to spend? How much should I charge? What should my contracts look like? Whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's I'm not sure if this if your clients are here, make a shield for my Arduino thing.
Right.
That's not the type of client that can pay $160 an hour.
Sure. Yeah, and they're engineers putting this together, so they show you the distribution. They give you the mean, the median, the max, the upper decile, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. This is actually another tweet that came through as well. Where was this one? So Lab Spokane on Twitter asked, what I really want to know is, why do engineers feel they must undercharge for time as a consultant? No one should be blanching at $100+ an hour. I agree with that sentiment, and then I believe someone else had mentioned that doing like pro bono type stuff, but just generally like hour wise, I mean, like, what is the psychology behind charging hours? You kind of covered it a little bit already because of the variability, but like the hourly rates and things like that. Dave said 160 an hour. Some people probably heard that and said, holy crap. And some people said, that's all, right? So like,
yeah.
What is the psychology behind all this stuff to you guys?
I found it's varied by client, and you really have to figure out, like I said, like those ones where I'm doing 20 hours a week, I'm charging them a lot less than I am a client that says, we want 10 hours and you need to use Altium and your own oscilloscope, So part of it is kind of what the business arrangement is. And then part of it is sometimes you need to get work, and I've lowered my rate just to get that particular job. So,
the other big thing that I use as a knob is allocating who holds the risk. So if something I'm particularly sensitive of is if a client wants this one thing and they want me to figure it out and be like, I don't know how you're going to do it. You don't know how you're going to do it, but you got to figure it out and do whatever it takes. If I'm taking on more risk than there needs to be that upside to counteract the potential downside of me sitting there beating my head against it for a couple weeks. Meanwhile, if a client's like on an hourly agreement or whatever, and they're like, okay, kind of run with a leash that's kind of long, then I may be more in tune with a lower rate. So I always want to be mindful of making sure that I'm not getting in a situation where I've been working for 1 million hours and I'm no longer getting paid, and I haven't taken the risk into account.
I think so personally, like coming into this, like I could do the math on my last salary, and I could do like the 1.3x billing, like you take your I read a couple things about it, like how you can figure out your rate, and
Mm-hmm.
all of it felt bad. All of it felt like, oh crap, no one will ever pay me that much. You know what I mean? Like, and I still feel that's imposter syndrome right there, right?
Yeah,
But like,
there you go.
Yep.
but it's but I think it's tough, and I'm sure that rates change over the years too. So like, there's also that. So maybe it's okay to take more. I think one of the guys in my workspace talks about like just taking more at the beginning and then figuring out if you're. And I think it's in one of these documents too. It's like if you have more work than you can handle, it's time to up your rates, that kind of thing. I think that's
But it's also what you are working on, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's, for example, because I care for this whole open source stuff for some reason, haha. If this work is the client is like, okay, well, we can open source this or contribute it to the project, I'm much more willing to give them a better price.
Sure.
Then it's like, oh no, it is all ours, and you will not be allowed to work on the same thing for the next 10 years. I usually will say no to such an arrangement anyways, but...
What about, you guys knew this question was coming up. What about when they promise you equity?
No, just a hard no.
Flat no. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You never had
I've been thinking about it more and more, but it like these guys, it doesn't quite fit with my current. I got 2 young kids. They're in daycare and stuff. Cash. Daycare won't accept equity payment.
Well, and I think
equity.
part of the problem for me is that you're getting equity in something that at least the offers I've been given is a little bit of equity in something I have no control over. So you're asking me to trade my time that I could be using for, in my case, other clients or for my own projects, right? For something that I don't have a huge stake in.
You're saying because the business stuff is so important to that, or what?
The business. Well, it's more of a like, what is this person going to do with this business? Like, I can't help set the direction. So if I have a little bit of stake in this business and they take a direction that I don't think is going to be successful, then what's that stake worth to me? Like, it's so.
Yeah, you're just along for the ride.
Yeah.
Yeah, I also personally, it's like, if I want equity, I will just work on my own stuff, right?
Right.
It's true.
It's like, that's how I feel about it.
Yeah.
And it's like, I've also been in enough startups to develop a quite bad taste for equity payments, where it's like, yeah, if you don't have enough funding to actually take this thing off the ground, then you will give people equity. That's just my bad experiences caused that feeling.
The other thing is it totally changes the negotiation and the relationship. So now I'm not just a consultant, I'm a consultant and an investor. And do you really want that muddying the waters? And then on top of that, every founder of a company ever overvalues their company. And so you're like, that's just the nature of it. If they didn't think it was an amazing idea, they wouldn't be doing it. And so when you're trying to sit there, unless there's already a valuation set by like a VC or whatever, it's really hard to figure out like, okay, what should these shares be worth? And you don't want to be having that negotiation.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, they gave me 10,000, so that sounds like a lot.
Yeah, 10,000.
There's only 1 billion shares outstanding, so Oh boy, yeah. So I've already dealt with this a little bit, but not much, and I've been in some startups as well, and so it seems like a crapshoot regardless. So has any of it been positive in that regard or no?
I have not made any money from equity. I have equity in worthless companies.
Okay.
I know people that made money with equity. That's pretty much it.
Okay, so it's like a fireside story that you tell. It's like Bitcoin. I know someone who made money in Bitcoin.
Yeah, it's like I wish I got Bitcoin when I heard about it for the first time, right?
Right. Doesn't do shit for you now, though. Yep.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of cash and stuff like that too, because another question I had was just about reserves. You don't have to tell me about cash, dollars you have in the bank, but like, do you guys have rules for yourselves about like having reserves on hand or like cash in the bank for rainy days, stuff like that?
It's not for rainy days. It's for my mental sanity. If I don't have cash sitting around, I would be so concerned with money that I wouldn't be as effective at working.
So like just because of the ups and downs of billing.
Yeah, you know, well, and remember,
receivables
I've already accepted the fact that I have no control over projects. It helps to know that I've got cash behind it. But even apart from working as a consultant, I mean, Chris, you and I were working at Keithley through the whole downturn of the financial crisis. Like, you could show up the next day and your job's gone.
Yeah,
they cut out
that's
that
true.
whole division. It was concerning when engineers better than I was were getting fired just because they were in a different division than I was.
Yep.
And it's like, man, I need more money in the bank.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a tiny scar on our psyches regardless, right? I think a lot of people, right? Some people had it way worse than we did.
Yeah, right. We kept our jobs. It wasn't bad at all.
It wasn't great, but yeah, it wasn't as bad as it could have been. Yeah, I think that so some of that stuff affects people and who are working still. But just more generally, I mean, like, do you guys keep do you say to yourselves, I want to have 6 to 12 months in the bank or anything like that? I guess, again, thinking about people who are listening, what they would want to have before they got started.
I think usually I try to say 12 months. And actually, you were asking about if someone wants to get into consulting. I think one of the first steps is to get your personal finance stuff in order. I know for me, my wife was really good at that, and having not having a bunch of extra debt and things to deal with, it really helps with those rough times. So I think if you're going to get into consulting, if you have a lot of extra things floating around, take care of that stuff first. And
got it. Yep.
But it's going to change for your situation. Like, when I got into consulting, I had a big whack of cash, but I kind of needed it because I was solo. Now I've got a wife; she has a full-time job. So if I don't have another job for the next 12 months, we'd still eat, we'd still pay our mortgage, all that stuff happens. Whereas when I was solo, it would be like, oh my God, I don't want to move back in with my parents.
So you're saying your ability to find a mate was your best resource, huh?
You know what? My ability to find a mate was probably the best resource the whole life.
Yeah, I've met your wife, and I agree with that.
Yeah, I definitely started with barely any money in the bank account. It was, I moved here, I have a month or two enough money, or actually it was more, how much money do I have so that I can buy some PCBs and boards so I can start selling them.
Man, I admire you. That's awesome.
Yeah, that's a pretty raw approach there, Peter. Yeah,
but I knew my situation was very specific. It was like, well, if everything fails, I have to have enough money to buy a plane ticket back to Germany. And that was pretty much it. And then hopefully Siemens or someone will want to hire me. And that is still today, it's actually still the way I try to think about this. That's why I was saying, I went through some interviews a few years ago where I was like, let's see if a bigger company would even want to hire me. And it's like, okay, they seem to be okay with hiring me again. And it's like, that keeps me my sanity.
I see.
If everything falls apart, I will still have a job that I can fall back to. Yeah. And that gives me enough mental stability so I can continue doing what I actually love. And
it's like a mental
I have
backstop,
control over.
Pretty much.
That's what it really comes down to is how much do you personally need for your situation? Because different people have different numbers. Like, I could never done what Peter did, and he made it go. So you really just got to figure that out for yourself. Put yourself in the worst case scenario and see how you'd feel.
Yeah,
that's true. Yeah.
Well, guys, this has been a really good conversation, I think. I mean, I'm definitely going to bring this up again on the AMP Hour, so people don't have to worry about that. Have you guys back on, have other consultants back on. I think it's, obviously it's something that the nice thing about being me is I get to pick out what we talk about, and that's great. So go me. But I really appreciate you guys, giving me. I would have asked you these questions regardless, in person or over chat or whatever. So I think it's nice that you were willing to do this on air. It really helps a lot.
Thank you for inviting.
Yes, thank you.
Of fun.
Where can people find you if they're looking for a consultant and they want to hire you?
Okay, 1bitsquared. Just look up 1bitsquared.com and there is a contact form. You can send me a message over there, or just piotr@1bitsquared.com.
And Peter will also have a project coming out we'll be talking about on here soon. So we'll talk about that soon.
Oh,
too.
yay. That will be fun.
Eric, what about you?
lowvoltagelabs.com. There's a contact form there, or on Twitter, also Low Voltage Labs.
Yeah, and you can get me at youngcircuitdesigns.com or Dave at youngcircuitdesigns.com.
Awesome, guys. Well, thanks for participating tonight, and we'll talk to you soon.
Have a good one.
It was great.
Thanks.